Right, good afternoon everybody. Hello and welcome to today's masterclass, how to build a security first culture. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping points. This session is being recorded and will be shared with our members and attendees in approximately 7 working days. So if you need to step away from today's session, you can catch up later. To minimise background noise, we've muted all attendees, but we do encourage interaction throughout the session today. Please use the Q&A feature at the top of your screen. Feel free to submit questions at any time. We have got a dedicated Q&A session towards the end, and we'll look to answer as many as possible during that time. If you experience any technical issues with Microsoft Teams, normally it can be corrected by refreshing your browser, or you might just need to exit and enter back in, and we'll admit you accordingly. Also, feel free to use the chat function, and I'll look to support where I can. And that's it from me. I'm now going to hand you over to Amanda, the CEO at CIISec, who's going to be chairing today's session.
That's lovely. Thank you, Don. Well, firstly, I'd like to welcome everybody for joining us. We have a lot of people out there, that we had over 230, I think, registered for this session. So it's showing how important this topic is to everybody at the moment. And we've got a real masterclass coming up and a great panel session. So you don't need to hear any more from me because I'm not the expert in this area. So I'd like to welcome Midori, who is a researcher at Social Machine, and she's been doing some research into this. So let me hand over to Midori and let her tell you what she's been up to.
Thank you. So I'll just share my screen real quickly. Let's dive into it. Oops. All right. So my talk today is called Cyber Risk Culture. What are we doing wrong and how can we do better? So just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Midori, and I'm a principal behavioral scientist at Social Machines. At Social Machines, we are essentially a team of behavioral scientists conducting research and innovation in this space, and we support organizations to understand and build effective systems of people and technology. A bit more about myself. My background is in industrial organizational psychology. I did my master's and PhD in psychology, and I've been doing a lot of research around leadership and workplace fairness and safety and organizational culture. And so for this talk today, I essentially led this project on cyber risk culture commissioned by the UK government, and I just wanted to share some of the key findings with you all. All right, so what are we talking about when it comes to cyber risks? Essentially, there's a possibility of something bad happening, and you want to stop it from happening, or at least make it not as bad when it does happen. But at the same time, you may have heard people say that this is not a priority right now, or I don't understand how this is important for us, or why are you interfering with our work? So obviously, how people collectively deal with cyber risk is important. And in this context, cyber risk culture is about how people in the organization feel and think about cyber risks and what they do with those risks. So the purpose of this research project was to answer 2 questions. First, what are the problems and barriers that organizations are facing today when it comes to building a strong cyber risk culture? And secondly, what can we do about these issues? And so to this end, we conducted interviews in May to June 2024 with 29 subject matter experts, many of them in cybersecurity domain, like chief information security officers or consultants. We also had some people who were directors or CEOs of cybersecurity consulting companies. And also, we also talk to people who are risk management consultants, so a bit more of a generalist and not specifically in the cybersecurity or cyber risk domain. On the whole, most people had experiences working in the private sector. There were some that had worked in the public and third sector as well. And generally speaking, we had some people who worked within the financial and insurance services, but also we had representation across different industries and sectors like business management, telecommunications, etc. And now onto the key findings. So essentially, I'll just share with you some of the themes that came up, and I'll end with moving forward, what we can do with some of the issues that were raised. So the first big theme that came up was concerns around the cybersecurity field overall and the professionals within it, in that many participants voiced concerns around how cybersecurity is still an underdeveloped field. And compared to, let's say, finance or medicine, where there's a lot of long history and, I guess, data and evidence behind the practices, people felt that sometimes outsiders see cybersecurity as somewhat of a new field that doesn't have a lot of evidence-based practice that are solidified. And because of that, it can sometimes be challenging when trying to implement, let's say, cyber risk management. People might not really trust or respect the professionals, and that was kind of a barrier there as well. The second point, again, within the field that people brought up is around not really trying to understand people. So as an example, a lot of the participants raised that soft skills are often ignored, for example, communication and interpersonal skills, in that often we might lose what we're trying to say within technical jargon, and really translating to business terms is important. And some of the external consultants that I spoke to, for example, sometimes said that essentially their job is just to translate what the internal cybersecurity team has been saying all along, so that the business and leadership really understand what needs to be done. And the third theme in this domain was around focus on technology. And almost all participants raised this as an issue, in that often within organizations, cyber risk is seen as an IT problem, and often that leads to confusion around who owns those risks, and organizations often think that technical or technological solutions will solve everything when it really doesn't. And related to this, the other major theme around the discussions was non-cyber people's motivation and behaviors. First of all, there were a lot of issues with participation and engagement, as you all might know. Obviously, we often talk about leadership support and buy-in, which can be a challenge, although some people did say more and more leaders are becoming aware and they can be supportive. But something that might be interesting was that some people talked about the critical nature of getting buy-in and support from lower and middle managers, in that sometimes you might have support from the senior leadership, but once you're trying to implement the strategy, you might get a bit of a barrier and resistance. And so the coordinated effort is really important. And one participant gave the metaphor or analogy around feeling as though him as a CISO was a goalkeeper trying to stop everything and nobody else is defending. So really highlighting this idea that it's a coordinated team effort rather than putting everything on one person. Lack of motivation among people outside of cyber was also a concern that was raised, in that some of these factors might come from the organization internally, in that there might be competing priorities that makes it challenging to implement cyber risk culture. For example, within retail or financial spaces, there might be a strong pressure for people to move fast and deliver quickly, and so cybersecurity might be seen as a nuisance or roadblocker. There were also discussions around external factors like high-profile or first-hand experiences with cyber incident can be a motivating force, but at the same time, that might not really be sustainable in the long run. And more broadly, there were issues around organizational contexts, in that I call this shaky foundation, in that if you were to set aside cybersecurity for a moment, the organization itself might not really be in a good place to start with. So as an example, the overall organizational culture might not really be working well with negative relationships and toxic bullying work environment, or poor coordination across departments in that people are not really talking to each other and communicating. One of the issues around here as well was how risk in general is separated from core decision making and not really integrated into how the organization makes decisions about its activities. Almost everyone that I talked to talked about money. It's often an issue. And the lack of funds, for example, in smaller organizations and charities and schools or hospitals can be an issue, where people talked about cybersecurity poverty line, where there just isn't enough funds and investment into cybersecurity. But even when there is some budget, there were still challenges with justifying spending on cybersecurity because the value added and return on investment might be difficult to quantify and communicate. One participant also talked about budget pendulum swinging in that even when there's a lot of interest in cybersecurity for whatever reason, let's say there was an incident, over time this interest might wane and so the budget might go down and then at some point it might come back. And this kind of instability can also make it challenging to plan for long-term sustainability. Another element that was brought up was understanding of risk or cyber risk that is varied or lacking. So what that means is at the conceptual or the theoretical level, there might be no consistent or agreed upon definition of risk, or there might be confusions around what cyber risk or risk is. So as an example, how risk is defined can vary across the disciplines. One participant talked about how within finance, sometimes risk is defined in terms of volatility, whereas within cybersecurity, a lot of people might think of it as a possibility of something happening, even if it has never happened before in the organization. And so there might be this mismatch about how risk is conceptualized. And so that can be a source of conflict or confusion when trying to work with people outside of the field. And relatedly, measurement of risk and cyber risk was also something that was brought up often, in that some people were not really happy about popular measures of risks, in that, for example, you might be familiar with things like the risk matrices or red, amber, green ratings. Although some of these tools can be helpful, there was a bit of a caution or hesitancy that sometimes there's a strong pressure for organizations to simplify things and remove this uncertainty of complexity. And at the same time, that can lead things to be a bit misleading or overly simplistic. And still within this understanding of risk, a lot of conversations centered around threat landscape as well, in that in the current environment, cybercrime is rewarded and often goes unpunished. And so that makes it pretty challenging for organizations to deal with cyber risks when the environment itself is hostile. And there were some thoughts around how cyber risk might be different from other kinds of risks, in that, for example, one participant talked about the importance of thinking about the fact that there is often a motivated actor behind a lot of cyber risks. And he kind of gave this analogy that, let's say there's a spill in the company's kitchen. That's obviously a hazard or a slipping hazard. But when it comes to cyber risk, it's almost as if someone is actively spilling coffee on the floor and constantly trying to get people to slip, which is a little bit strange when you think about it. But there is that element of intention behind it. And related to that, there were concerns around how, because cyber risk is often dynamic and evolving, in that it can change based on what the organization does, what others are doing, and where we are in time and space. Organizations still think of risk in a static way. And for example, they might just look at the risk register from one time in one place and might not really revise it or think about what else is going on outside of that. And of course, there's rapid changes like implications of AI capabilities on cyber risks, and all of those changes might be challenging for organizations to keep up with. The final kind of major theme that came out from these interviews was inter-organizational and international systems. So one element was barriers to sharing information, in that often a lot of the people that I spoke to talked about how within cybersecurity professionals, there's a lot of information sharing, but often this happens within among close peers in trusted networks. And so there's this incentive, obviously, to be open about cyber attacks or cyber threats too much beyond that closed circle. And there were also concerns around how risk propagates, in that the interconnectedness that we have today complicate things quite a bit, in that organizations might have difficulty really understanding that it is not really just about themselves, but also about their suppliers and also about their partners and their clients. And currently, a lot of organizations sort of underestimate how much they really rely on others. Another analogy, one participant talked about how it's as if you're trying to keep pests out of your garden when your neighbor isn't really trying so hard. So this kind of illustrates how it's not really about what you're doing in your own space, but it's also about thinking about what everybody else is doing. Again, that can be really challenging for any single organization too. And finally, there were discussions around frameworks as well. As you might imagine, common things like ISO and NIST. And participants said that often frameworks are necessary but not sufficient, in that it tells you what to do, but not exactly how to do it. And so organizations might struggle with really applying frameworks and standards to their own specific context because they don't really have a clear sense of what it means in their own work and environment. And there were also some concerns that focusing too much on frameworks and standards can lead to a bit of a box ticking and too much focus on compliance, which again could be dangerous when you're trying to think about enhancing the culture of the organization overall. All right, so moving forward, what can we do about this? So I kind of collected 6 things that you can potentially start today. First being promoting undervalued skills. As I mentioned earlier, things like communication skills are obviously important to get your message across, but things like leadership and influence becomes important, especially when you're in a senior position. And overall behavior and culture change can be useful, and just general knowledge around risk management is obviously helpful in managing cyber risks. And so training for these skills and expertise can be helpful, but at the same time, not everyone needs to do everything. It's participants also talked about how it can be helpful to work with people with these skills, so people who might not really be in the traditional technology space, if you will. The other element to this is to build inclusive communities, in that, as I mentioned earlier, information sharing often happens among big established organizations. And so to make sure that as a group, we are all remaining resilient and helping one another, it can potentially be helpful to include small or less or established organizations in these networks as well. The third element is to share context-specific stories. What I mean by that is to try to make cyber risks real to people. So giving examples that are tailored to specific contexts and industry or sector. So just as an example, one participant that I interviewed, I think he was a external consultant for cybersecurity. He really gave this story of where he communicated to the stakeholders who were in the gas company, that how the gas is distributed to homes need to have a smell added to it to make sure that people can detect the leak. But that system of adding the smell is computerized. So if that system fails or is compromised, that can potentially lead to a lot of accidents and many deaths. So that's really kind of building that story around how is this relevant to what the organization cares about and society at large in terms of accidents and injuries and deaths among people. Fourth, as I mentioned at the top, kind of building this evidence base and understanding best practices can also be helpful. So obviously trying new things and initiatives and interventions can be helpful, but checking whether the interventions worked or not could be an additional benefit. And sharing such findings with others broadly and participating in research projects like this one could be great as well, so that people like me can share the findings widely. The fifth point is to consider integrating cyber risk with other risks. And so thinking about how cyber links into other risks within the organization, like financial and operational risks, and how risk management is happening overall within the organization instead of focusing only on the cyber element. And the last point that I want to leave with you is consider venturing outside cybersecurity. In that, as I mentioned earlier, the organization's overall culture is important. And so collaborating with people who are already working on organizational culture, for example, safety culture or wellness, or even diversity and inclusion, can potentially be helpful. And related to this, building connections with people, let's say in human resources, law, finance, and business and management can bridge this gap and make cybersecurity more visible outside of the traditional domains and bring more people in to help with building cyber risk culture. Just a few takeaways from this research. What I took away from it is that good cyber risk culture looks like this. Cyber risks are linked to organizational priorities and their senior leader support and their stakeholder engagement at all levels. Cyber risk is really integrated with other risks. And the overall culture of the organization supports and enhances cyber risk culture. So I want to leave you with this question around what do you believe are important for cyber risk culture and what does it look like in your specific context? That's the end of my talk. I just wanted to thank the research team and obviously you for listening. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can contact Nick, who will be in the panel next as well. And I believe Dom will be putting the short report from this research project in the chat. So if you want to take a look at that, it is freely available. And if you want to talk to us, we'll look forward to that. Thank you.
Right, Midori, that was wonderful, and it's obviously gone down really well with the audience. You've had lots of clapping hands and things there, so that is fantastic. And you've given us a great lead in to the panel session, because what we're going to be talking about is really what good looks like. So you've left us with some lovely points, and I'm really looking forward to reading your report very, very soon, and that will be loaded up in the chat. I'm sure there are lots of questions for you. We're going to come back to the questions after the panel session. So again, I'm not going to witter on because there's too much to talk about. I'd like to welcome our panelists now. So welcome to Sarah, Nick, Silvano, and Dan. I think probably rather than me trying to introduce you, can you do a quick 30 seconds, not 30 minutes this time, 30 seconds on who you are, where you come from, and your background in security culture. Go on, Sarah, you start first.
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks, Midori. That was awesome. My name's Sarah, and I am CEO and founder at Layer 8, an organisation that harnesses the collective power of people to reduce risk, and we do that through running champions programmes. Before that, I've been sort of running culture change programmes in businesses in different organisations, and my kind of background and research is really around positive reinforcement and collaboration and conversation being primary catalyst for change. Thank you.
That's great. Who's next? Dan, you're next on my
okay, thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Dan Jeffrey, Managing Director at Deinter, which is a boutique cyber and data and engineering organisation. Prior to here, I was CISO and Deputy CIO for NHS Blood and Transplant. And prior to that, I ran the National Cyber Programme for the NHS, which included a big focus on kind of culture and how we shift that across a large federated system. So my background or my interest around kind of the human factors component of cyber is how do we drive the right motivations, the right behaviours, whilst also ensuring that we unlock and maintain the kind of business and operational value.
Brilliant. That's lovely. And Nick, do you want to go next?
Great to
Oh,
meet you.
you're on mute. Oh, no, you're not. You're now back.
You're okay.
Yes, we can hear you, Nick.
Yeah, perfect. So I'm a director at Social Machines. So I work alongside Midori. At the risk of repetition, Social Machines, we're a behavioural science research and innovation company. We're a team of behavioural scientists, psychologists, anthropologists, and we're all dedicated on helping organisations change and improve their organisational cultures. I've worked in cyber for over 20 years, companies like Detica and Access Global Best Practice, and spent the last 10 years really focused on human factors, working for and advising 3 of the leading human risk management suppliers, and advising hundreds of organisations of all shapes and sizes on their cybersecurity culture, strategy, and human risk management journeys. Safe to say, I keep listening and I keep learning in helping to develop new evidence-based and human-centric approaches to building strong security cultures. And I think that we're very much at the start of this journey. And for me, the cyber human factors needle really hasn't fundamentally moved over the last 15, 20 years. And I do think we need to look more broadly at behavioural science and other disciplines and domains that Midori touched on to better understand how we can measure and support our security culture.
Excellent. And we found Silvano.
Thank you, Amanda. Good afternoon, all. Silvano Sogus. I have 25 years of experience in cybersecurity. Worked almost all my career in critical national infrastructure, energy and telecommunication mostly. And my experience in building culture is both onward in building internal culture, mostly on the technical side, but also on the risk management side, and external also making sure that the culture that you build in an organization is also aligned with the culture that you expect from the supply chain that you have. So making sure that there are no weak points in the chain of supply. So yeah, happy to be in this panel.
We're very happy that you're all with us. And just to say that Sarah and Silvano are fellows at CIISec. So that's great. And let's kick off. Midori was saying how important it is that you align really with the culture of your organisation. And you all work in very, very different environments and have very different backgrounds and sectors and things like that. And I think it'd be quite good to explore that so that helps the audience. So why doesn't one size fit all? So Sarah, what have you been seeing with your clients?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. So I mean, we work with organisations from small 100 size UK based to big global organisations, 300,000 plus people. And it's interesting because when organisations always say we're unique, and then they talk to us about their risks, and actually they all say the same things. They all, talk about risk of data breach, risk of ransomware, phishing, etc. So you could argue that if everybody's risks, whether they're a large organisation or a small organisation, are similar-ish, is it okay to just buy something off the shelf and stick it out to an organisation? But the difference is what people care about. So in a large organisation, perhaps they're striving to implement AI so they can get ahead of their competitors. In a smaller organisation, perhaps they're really worried about how do I get revenue in? How do we, get out to the marketplace? So I think that difference is about how the messages are positioned. We all know that we're all so busy, and to really care, and I think that's the nugget there, getting people to care, it has to be relevant. So it's got to link up to what people are doing and what's driving the organisation, even though the risks and some of the advice might actually be similar. It's about how we get it across to people.
Yeah, and the words that we use as well. It's language, isn't it? Commonality and things like that. Dan, I'm going to come to you next because your background is in the health service, and I mean looking after blood and transplants. Can't even say it. It must be a completely different set of things that people need to think about, and probably very much aligned with safety culture and things like that. Anyway,
Yes.
I'm putting words into your mouth. You tell me.
No, the right words. It certainly is kind of aligning around kind of the safety culture, but drawing very much on kind of what Sarah was just saying, is that it's about how do you make it relevant to folks. Now, when we look at a clinical setting, you've got a whole bunch of different types of skill sets, different types of motivations working in and around an organization. You have the clinicians who are driven by, make the patient comes first. If security or security controls or what have you get in the way of that, they work around them. Because the patient comes first, delivery of patient care. You then have the technical folks who are almost purists about keeping systems up and running. So security comes first over X, Y, or Z. So, and then in between that, you have kind of management and then the senior leadership, motivated and driven by additional stresses and strains. And in the NHS, that's normally around kind of finances and budgets and things. So how the key that we found when we were building our program within NHS Blood and Transplant was how do we find a core narrative that sings to all of those different kind of motivations and those different drivers of kind of individual action. So one of the ways that we're able to do that is ultimately good cybersecurity is an enabler of digital patient outcomes, right? So it spoke to the fact that we are all here because we want to save people over there. And then how you interpreted that, given your role and your position, etc., was in your own gift to be able to do so. There were certain particular changes of language and kind of phraseology, if you will, to really bring it home to the clinicians, especially because we found through kind of research, etc., that they were the ones most likely to deviate, shall we say, from good cyber practices if it got in the way of them delivering their primary objective. So what we were able to do was actually tie back their primary objective into cybersecurity. So we said, clinicians, nurses, doctors, etc., they all sign up to the Hippocratic Oath, right? The keep patient confidentiality and do no harm. In a digital world, that the CIA triad, the security triad of confidentiality, integrity, and availability is absolutely translatable across. Confidentiality, we kind of got that. We've got that for the last 2,000 years since Hippocrates kind of said it in the first place. The availability, if you don't have data, don't have information at the right time in order to make a diagnostic decision, that availability does patient harm, or lack of availability does patient harm. If you are unable to trust the data, if the integrity of the data is compromised, that does patient harm. And converting it into that language resonates back to the core of what clinicians do, kind of the change of perspective and the increase in respect for cyber as a thing that they could then go and be interested to learn about, kind of almost changed near enough overnight as we kind of care to think.
That's really brilliant because it's just bringing it back to the do no harm. And you can't argue with that. It's a great strapline as well for everything. And you're working in a very different sector now. We'll come back to that probably in a few minutes because you're trying to keep techies under control, which is usually fairly impossible. Silvano, let's stick with the public sector because you've got a long experience there. What are but very different, obviously, to Dan. What sort of things have you been seeing, and what's been important in the areas that you've been working?
Yeah, I think what is key. So I was hearing the words of Dan, and it was resonating to me. How do you translate this type of concepts also when you are using suppliers? Because public sector, semi-public sector, and so on, they have the problems that the problem of the peculiarity that you buy services from third parties, from private organizations, right? So you have your own vision of risk. What Midori was saying before about the typical matrix of major risk of the organization, that can be a cyber risk, it can be typical enterprise risk, it can be a mixture of them. And then you need to translate those risks in requirements when you do your procurement. And typically, when you're talking about public sector, the procurement phases can be really long and pretty convoluted.
Yeah.
And you have a bit of a conundrum there, because most of the risks that you are defining are sensitive. You don't want to necessarily share all the details of those risks. This is your vision, and is also, in a way, disclosing where you think you can be most vulnerable. But at the same time, you need to be able to translate those risks in requirements when you do your procurement phase. Because if I'm buying something and someone is giving me a service, they need to know what are my concerns. They need to know where they can play best from the security side. So I need to be able to tell them what is my security culture, okay? And at the same time, I need to be able to measure their position. So because they all obviously will tell me, oh, yes, we can do that. Yes, we can give you what you need and even more, just buy that for that. But this is something that doesn't work in a point in time. It needs to be constantly rehearsed, constantly measured, especially when there are incidents and when it is pretty clear that what was promised is not necessarily up to par with what was delivered. So these are all learning points. So this is where the culture, really the element of culture kicks in. You're using incident to learn rather than to, point fingers. And there is also an element of discussion, again, from the supplier side on what do you do when you fail? Show me what you're going to, show me how do you ingrain those learning points. And what I've seen working reasonably well is kind of creating micro teams, let's say, with representatives of the suppliers and our representatives together, in order to work on how to improve the collective security culture. I wouldn't use necessarily the word champions, but let's say the concept is not far away. There's some elements, some key elements that are able to shift the needle a bit, like Dan was talking about, in order to improve learning from near misses or even full-fledged incidents.
Yeah. No, I think it's coming back to this whole thing of engagement, isn't it? That's the thing that's sort of running through all of you at the moment.
Is recognizing that is a shared problem. It's not a unique problem, neither of the organization, neither of the supplier. Everybody's on the same level.
Yeah, definitely. Nick, I can see you nodding away madly there. The floor is yours for a bit.
Yeah, so just picking up on some of the points that have been raised, the important thing for me, I think, it just highlights the fact that security and security teams can't now continue to work in splendid isolation. They are critical teams across the business. They need to actively involve, collaborate with, talk to their peers across the rest of the business. And something that Dan said, it just highlighted again, and so the importance of setting that vision for the security culture is ultimately a responsibility of the leadership team, and that leadership team should be cross-functional. Security culture is a multidisciplinary role, so we need to work better at making sure that security is actively discussed at the senior levels in setting that culture. And when we talk about culture, again, I've seen many times or a different opinion about actually what culture means. So I think that the textbook definition is a common set of shared features across the organization, whether that's beliefs, values, norms, and attitudes. And I also think we need to build a better understanding of why are people, whether in the boardroom or on the front line, why they behave in the ways that they do, and critically the factors that are very often not security or technology related, that impact how we behave. For example, trust and collaboration and support and guidance from within your team, all really critical factors. So just to sort of highlight some of the research that we've done at Social Machines over the last few years, both industry and academic research, has identified sort of 4 critical factors that drive a positive security culture. And it's the impact of these far wider factors that have on people and their ability to work securely that I think we need to better understand to help enable that security culture in the future. And the leadership team have a critical role in enabling that. And then something that Silvano said, the critical area of actually measuring culture as well. So culture can definitely be measured and tracked.
I think measurement is absolutely key, and I think we should come back to that and have a look at it. But engaging with senior management, who wants to have a go at what's worked for them in terms of case studies or mini case studies of how they've managed to do that? Who's smiling? Oh, Dan's smiling at me. Come on.
Okay, I mean, there's the so I suppose I would say it's going to sound quite bizarre, but in a fortunate position, shall we say, being able to engage with senior management after having very receptive kind of response from them after a nationwide national scale incident, right? So the ultimate burning platform that was WannaCry. We had been saying to them for a number of years, kind of, and we've been doing the analysis, we'd probably need to spend more than 5 million quid a year on cyber for the whole of the NHS. And here's kind of what we need, and blinding poverty or calling poverty everywhere. Then immediately after kind of May 2017, we managed to find 150 million quid down the back of a sofa, right? So it is ultimately, sadly, the burning platform, and that still happens. That still happens. We can have the all of the right kind of culture, kind of programs in place, and everybody is saying it. And the testament for me, when Nick was just talking about measurement, the real measure is having people paying lip service versus actually truly doing. And truly doing ones are the ones who invest and do the right thing ahead of time. Those that kind of say, yes, we have a cyber first culture, a cyber secure culture, it's all about this because it enables our business to run effectively and efficiently and profitably, and then get absolutely turned over through very basic and poor practices are the ones that where it's just lip service. And I'll give a good example of that. Synovis that kind of took out quite a large part of the clinical pathology pathways in Southwest London last year, had been saying, yes, we have good cyber practices, we have all these things, compliance, it's core to our thing, and it is a patient safety issue and it's non-negotiable. And then ultimately the way in which they were compromised was shocking. So it is only lip service. So we have on that side the thing that also then used to come in, and it's to one of the points that's been raised in the chat, is the sticks also now need to be bigger. So that when things like this happen, there is a need to have people held to account. That is another driver for it, because you have people's lives being impacted through pretty poor practices, whilst at the same time, they are saying that they have the right and appropriate culture and mentality as an organization. It starts to feel a little fraudulent when all those factors get kind of pulled together. So how do you solve for X?
Yeah, and I think the thing is that it's the easy solution is sack the CISO. Get another one. That's what's the classic.
Having sat in having been in those shoes, it's quite an uncomfortable place to be. But this is actually the thing on the how do you get the good engagement, is having that open, honest, transparent conversation. You're saying we do this, but in actual fact, the facts on the ground are this. We need to reconcile the two, and making sure that you do it in a collaborative way. And not in there are some folks within, as we know, within kind of the security world, as there are with any kind of tech world or what have you, which are almost zealotous in their approach, uncompromising. And the fact is you have to balance the two between kind of business need, security risk, somebody's got to make the call about what that balance looks like, and it's the CISO's role to help inform that decision, because it is a business risk at the end of the day.
So I can see Sarah's nodding away and wanting to join this at this point. Is that how do you help the CISOs with the organisations that you're working with to actually get the hearts and minds of the board in effect?
Yeah, a couple of things I'd want to put on there. I think that the first point, which speaks to a bit of what Dan and Nick and Savannah have already been saying, is that obviously in security we have our own objectives. We want to protect the organisation, etc. But if we just bluster into the boardroom with our kind of to-do list, it's very, very difficult to win people over, whatever language we use. So if we haven't got that burning platform of, something that's just happened, the threat of a breach and banging on about that probably isn't going to win people over either. But actually spending some time to really understand, the other people's objectives and build those relationships before you even talk about security, I think is the first part. The second part that I want to bring into, when we talk about culture and behaviour, it can be really difficult to grasp hold of. We've seen, in Midori's presentation, when we're talking about the more technical aspects of security, there's lots of frameworks. But when we talk culture, we still talk far too loosely. And what I would recommend is for organisations to look at being really, really clear. So some work that I've seen organisations do is developing a set of risk mitigating behaviours. So every organisation has risk and they have a strategy, hopefully, right, that mitigates those risks. But what are the behaviours that fall out of those? And if the organisation can be really clear to say that if our people are doing these 5 or 6 things, they will really help mitigate and impact risk reduction. So becoming really clear on what they are and how people can action that. The useful thing there is that also links back into measurement as well, because if we just say we want to be able to measure culture, it's a bit like, and so what? But if we can say, we have the risk of a data breach, we are implementing DLP solutions, etc. One of the behaviours we want to ensure that people use SharePoint and they use role-based access control. That means that there's a really clear behaviour. We can make sure that we are educating the organisation and champions, if you run champions programs, to upskill people in how to do that. And also you've got a very, very clear way of being able to measure that, because there's a specific outcome that you can look for there.
No, when we've touched on measurement before as well, and I think it is important that we can demonstrate to the business that we are making a measurable difference with that. So coming back, I think, was it Nick, you were talking about measurement, weren't you?
Yeah, sure. I think lots of people struggle with understanding how they might measure culture. And as a team of behavioral scientists and psychologists and anthropologists, we, the team get that and understand that. So the work that we've done has helped to identify these 4 critical drivers and that influence and a positive security culture. So they're leadership, knowledge, social environment, and policy. Now, these are all the things that wrap around our day-to-day experiences and in trying to stay compliant in doing our job, and as I say, trying to do that in a way that protects the organisation's information. But and within those 4 factors, there's a number of sub-factors, and I think what's interesting is for us is that off the back of all of that research that we've done, so many of them are about things totally outside security and technology, and it's about the wider environment that influences how we make those decisions. The important thing is that we actively engage with our colleagues, we've said this already, and peers and seniors, and understanding what security truly means for them, and actually understanding the feelings that we have, not necessarily the knowledge, but testing the feelings about from our employees from top to bottom about what they feel about cybersecurity in the organisation. And you'll be amazed when you ask them what they tell you. And often it is not
Interesting.
about, it's a whole range of things that potentially have not been identified. And we need to have clearly defined, we're talking about security culture, but we need to have clearly defined roles and responsibilities for managing that, measuring that, and we need to extend beyond those policies and procedures to things like, as Sarah just touched on, reporting suspicious activities, encouraging positive engagement with security initiatives. And it comes back to this importance of a shared responsibility across the organisation and having as Dan has touched on, a shared narrative, a common narrative at the board, which is going away from perhaps the traditional narrative around security, protecting the business. It's about supporting their future growth and their ability, their core missions like patient health and things.
Brilliant. No, that's great. I think we're getting nearly close to time, aren't we? Got a few more minutes?
A couple more minutes.
Brill. Excellent. Silvana, coming back to the supply chain.
Yeah.
Because I think that's one of the biggest problems that we face. How do you see measurement helping in that particular sphere?
Yeah, so there are, in my experiences, there are direct measures that are related with almost all with compliance, which is related with the assurance of security assurance evidence that the supply chain can provide you. And this can be all spectrum from totally transparent to totally opaque. So it depends. And this should be one of the drivers when you select a supply chain. What are you able to tell me about your security posture in general? Obviously, the cultural element, like also Nick was touching, is a bit more difficult, right? How do you measure the security culture of a supplier? What type of questions you should ask them? And this is one of those things where those elements were focusing on a specific event, which can be an incident, can be a vulnerability, can be something that is going around, and that the supplier is subject to, especially if they are supplying, let's say, devices, helps in a way, because the type of conversation that normally I had are related with what you guys have done in order to make sure that this doesn't happen in the future. And this is not related necessarily to improve your patching, but how did you improve your relationship of the different teams? Because this vulnerability was caused by something that your DevOps team didn't inject in your pipeline because the requirement wasn't there. So something like that. So this is, in my view, is one of those things for which the closest you can get to your supplier, the best is for making sure that everybody is talking the same language, is on the same page. And this is easier said than done, to be honest, depending on the supplier. But I think that there is a definitely process of maturation in this field.
No, there's some great points there, and there's some great chat going on that I think we're going to have to write up the chat afterwards, because there's loads of ideas being thrown in there, which is lovely that it's really interactive. I think
you could do the one takeaway.
I can do it. Oh, right, okay. I've been given some instructions by Dom. Before we go to the questions, if everybody slept through this session and they only remembered one thing, which I don't think they will, but what's the one thing that you would like to leave the audience with remembering to do? So who wants to go first with that? Sarah, you're up in the top right, so you go first.
Okay, I'll throw in one thing that I think security leaders can do. As a leader in security, great to have a security culture team, but actually make security culture the objective of everybody in your security team. So, for example, as a security engineer, it's not just your job to develop the tool, it should also be your objective to make sure that that is launched and communicated and people can use it. So I think if culture sits right across security, that's going to really support moving that forward.
I think that's a really good one. And I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago where she actually got the techie teams to go out and talk to the end users, and then suddenly they weren't these scary people that were over there. They needed coaching, but you know, they
do.
yeah, they definitely need coaching. Dan, your one thing,
Yeah.
just one thing.
Yeah, my one thing would be to kind of frame the narrative of cyber as something that is an enabling and positive, not just a negative thing that we have to do. It is something that, yes, protects the bottom line, but done correctly helps drive and grow the top line.
Excellent, and that's coming back to you'll do no harm almost message. That's great. That's lovely. Silvana.
Yeah, I spoke at length about supply chain, right? So I will leave about that, which is make sure that you have the conversation with your main suppliers, where you are able to, one, frame what is your internal security culture, how does it work, how do you measure it, and then secondly, that you expect at least the same level from your main suppliers. If it's better, it's even better. So if it's higher, it's even better, because you can learn, you can improve, but not lower, because guess what, you will be dragged down to the lower level if they are worse than you. So I would encourage to have that discussion before they becoming your main supplier, not after.
I like that. It's very much leading by example.
Yes,
isn't it?
yes,
Which
definitely,
is
definitely.
it's
Yes.
you know, you're doing the talk and the walk with that. So
Yes.
that's great. That's lovely. And Nick, what's your one, just one thing?
Yeah, I might have two. I might sneak two in here, but my
Two.
experience.
Nobody was allowed to. You have to choose one.
Organisations that I've seen, and it's evidence that they've got a positive culture. Two things. One is they have an active programme, we've touched on it, of sharing stories, real life stories within the organisation. They discuss them. It's a great opportunity for collaboration, building that trust across the organisation that, you know, everything is up for grabs in terms of talking about it and admitting mistakes. And the second one, which I saw in evidence, particularly at a presentation I was in when the chief executive of the organisation was in front of the whole organisation, relatively small. He stood up and he talked about the fact that he'd been the target and victim of an attack himself very recently. And I think it's important for the leadership team to demonstrate to all of the teams their understanding that they are as vulnerable as anyone. And I think that's really important as well. It's having that openness about their own vulnerability and learning from that.
No, I think your second point, I like both of your points, but the second point I really like, which is to move away from a blame culture, that it can happen to anybody. And I've seen that happen in another organisation as well, where the finance director was hit and he shared his experience, and it did an awful lot to raise morale and things from there.
Yeah.
We've got time for a couple of questions.
We've got time for a couple of questions. I've never seen a Q&A panel light up like this before. It's been quite. We might need to do a follow-up session.
I think that we're certainly going to come back to this. I think everybody's bedtime reading has got to be to read the report, and we'll type up the chat as well, because there's some great things being shared in the chat. Just if you can still
I've picked a couple out. Yeah. So Yvette asked about resourcing, and this has been a problem. What can be done to influence UK government to help resolve this?
Oh gosh, who wants to go for that one? You're all quiet. This is a tricky one. Have I got to pick on somebody?
I mean, I can talk about. I can't talk about UK government. I'll just hold my hands up. No clue on that piece. But I think, obviously, we do a lot with champions programs, and I think, you know, where you have got a small security team, but you've got a good culture, you've got good people in your organisation that want to support with change, then champions can really help, you know, move the needle. Just with having a couple of hours with people across the organisation, you can start to get some of those messages out with context, tailored to people, and it really does help to give a little bit of extra reach on that sort of thing at low cost as well. But somebody might want to take the UK government part of the question, please.
I'm going to pick on Dan and Silvano, I think, on this, because coming back to your NHS thing, do you feel that you actually were able to influence government after WannaCry?
Yeah, certainly. After WannaCry and during COVID, on both those things from a cyber perspective, absolutely. And then reality and normality kind of then reign supreme afterwards. And the pendulum kind of sadly swings back to Kafkaesque bureaucracy. So that's where the challenge kind of lies. On the resourcing side, we had huge challenges in the NHS, especially for the National SOC, right? Security Operations Centre, where we're delivering a load of these services. So we were able to work with with kind of the department, government for want of a better term, to have a RRP, so a recruitment and retention premium, put onto the skills required because there are such rare skill sets. When you then kind of look into like local organizations, it becomes a lot more tricky to be able to recruit and then importantly retain folks. One thing that the NHS are really good at is paying for training. So you imagine that you are a security specialist or orientated person that's going into work into a hostel somewhere in London, say 40 grand a year at kind of entry level. You get paid your CIISec, a whole bunch of really good and important accreditations, and then Deutsche Bank come along, and then they say, I'll stick a 1 in front of that salary and a 0 on the end of it. Do you still want to work in the hospital? And even the most morally kind of driven people are going to say, well, no, sadly not. And that is a genuine problem that we have.
We've seen that also within law enforcement, is that the training and everything is great. And then people get to a point where they get frustrated and they see the downside. So yeah, I think retention is something we ought to come back to in another session, because there's lots of wonderful things there that we could actually talk about with that. Do we want to stick with this, or do we want to?
I've actually got a question that's been addressed to Silvano.
Great.
Silvano, could you elaborate further about your comments, just how regarding security with respect to suppliers? That comes from Mark.
Well, yes, but depends on which angle, because it's a is a full chapter on his own. So I can say that, as I said, there is a mixture of approaches that are mostly related with compliance to certain schemes. So the last job that I did, I was Director of Security Architecture and Assurance in DCC. DCC is the company that manages smart meters in UK. There is a full-fledged assurance scheme that is required from suppliers. Okay, suppliers that are supplying services to DCC, so they are part of the infrastructure that is related with smart meters. They need to comply with all specific events that are described in the Smart Energy Code, Section G. I won't bother you with that. It's pretty long. The whole SEC is 1,000 pages, and it's not surely a duty of this discussion to elaborate on that. But it's easier in that respect when there is a guidance related one from compliance. Compliance can't do everything, right? So compliance will tell you, okay, you need to make sure that you are complying with this framework, with this set of controls. There will be an auditor that goes there, checks those controls one by one, and that's it. And you got the stamp. The cultural element, like we discussed so far, is a bit different, because it can't be assessed by, let's say, a set of controls. You really need to understand how is security embedded in an organization, and in my mind, how is it implemented and is improved. And this is where instead I would say direct relationship with representative of the supply of your suppliers is more important, because you need to have those conversations that sometimes can be really difficult, which is, okay, you haven't been impacted by that, but if you were, what would you have done, and how would you have told me that you would have done, you were impacted by this, and how would you improve against that? And you give me the truth. Don't give me the commercial side of these things. Give me the peer-to-peer how we can work together to make it better. So I think that thing cannot be done on a assurance step framework driven. Is a person to person or people to people. which in my view is a good thing, because in a moment in history where everybody is telling me that we will be replaced by AI in the next 5 years, I still see something that is for humans to be driven. So it's good.
Brilliant. That's lovely. One more or no more? No, I'm being lost. So, you have all been brilliant. But I hope that the panel has answered some of the hows to tackle the issues that we face. So I would like to thank everybody for being on the panel. And another thank you to Midori as well for a great presentation. There's been a massive amount of engagement, so thank you to everybody that's attended. And I think it's one that we're going to come back to again, definitely. So, and we'll definitely do something about this at live, I think, as well. So that's great. It's been a pleasure to be involved. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
And take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Oh.